Won't you join me and thank Mary and Kelly for that fabulous piece? That piece was one I requested by name. I just love that. Thank you so much. Thanksgiving Sunday. Do you remember those years that you would get a turkey that was about the size of a toddler? 22 pounds or something, and then you would have this massive thing. You'd have to take all the trays out of your oven but one in order to cook it and serve it. And if you're anything like me, I always overcooked my turkey because I grew up believing that there was some terrible thing that could happen to people that ate undercooked poultry. I wasn't sure if it was instantaneous and they were dead by dessert, or if it was slow and insidious and they were gone by Wednesday. But I knew there was something. And so it only worked for me if when you took the turkey out of the oven, the whole thing kind of fell into the roaster and you knew, I think it's done. Then, when I moved to the prairies, I discovered the most wonderful thing. We called it yam crack. Did you ever have that? Yams. Now, my mother was Scottish, so you can imagine what we do with vegetables. Enough said. Yam crack on the prairies was yams cooked with maple syrup, pecans, walnuts if you couldn't find them, and mini marshmallows. It was served as a vegetable by the same people that developed Jell-O salads as a salad. Right. So yam crack, you found yourself hoping no one would take seconds so you could just eat it between first course and dessert. I think they've withdrawn it now. The CDC probably has said we're not allowed yam crack anymore. But I did want to thank all the people, especially Marion Denton's committee, Jillian Chamberlain, and Marg McQuarrie for doing these beautiful things, and also, of course, the knitters. How fabulous this looks. There are about 6 things here on the table that if you planted them, they would actually grow. I want to get back to them later. The other thing I wanted to mention about those big turkeys was, did you have leftovers? Yeah. Some people's moms and they themselves became very creative with leftovers. Turkey pot pie and turkey sandwiches and turkey curry. We almost seemed to go immediately to turkey soup, in my experience. I didn't have those creative intergenerational things. And so here we are, 2020. I loved what Tony wrote, 2020, the worst year ever. And as I always like to say, there's a chance this is coffee. Because I think the coronavirus has brought out the worst. We've seen that, the racism, all the terrible things. It's brought out the worst in some people. It's also brought out the best. We've seen some extraordinary acts of kindness and generosity and gifts of time and people working double shifts, all sorts of examples. The scripture, the part of creation story that Job has the creation story in many parts that David read for us this morning, points to us in the extraordinary life that Job was living. At that time, he says, still we look to creation. We hear in creation the voice of God. We hear the wisdom of God in the birds of the air and in the trees. And I loved in Misha's story, the little birds you could hear in the background. At first I couldn't figure out what they were. So everyone, as we know, everyone has been affected by COVID-19. We didn't have the break between the first wave and the second wave that maybe we thought we would have in March. And in fact, we still have a sign up here in church says we're going to be closed till the end of March. It's not dated, so it's still good. But the everyone is now the global community, isn't it? I mean, we don't have the numbers of the Spanish flu, but we certainly have the spread. And in our own time, we can easily say everybody has been affected by COVID-19. But not everybody is equally affected, of course. We may be all in the same storm, as they say, but we're not all in the same boat. And how grateful we are to the people that we saw their pictures are helping us be in the particular boat we're in. So in the midst of that difficult time, like Job, we can look around and say, but still, what is there that we can be thankful for? I'm not saying that regardless of how you are feeling, or what's happening in your family, your neighborhood, or your heart, your job, your family, your kids at school having to be online, that everything should be placed in kind of a rosy hue because it's Thanksgiving. Because then it just becomes chaotic, spiritually and psychologically. Every day, whether there's a pandemic or not, we remembered loved ones' birthdays. Remember people who are no longer with us, or relationships that are no longer as life-giving as they once were. Life is complicated and often messy, and just because it's Thanksgiving doesn't make it less so. And just because it's COVID doesn't necessarily always make it more so. It's a difficult year, as Tony said. But for the authentic Thanksgivings, how do we find them? People have suggested that you kind of look around your life and think, what made me smile today? Or even what's making me smile right now? It may not even make me smile in 5 minutes. It certainly may not even be funny in a week. But is there something, anything, that makes me smile right now? Perhaps it's that beautiful music that Mary sang. We need to find a way to hear ourselves speak to ourselves about what is uplifting. Because we're going to need that going forward into this winter, aren't we? So, with a very gentle self-embrace, looking at ourselves with love and acceptance, what do we hear that lifts our hearts? So, part of our Thanksgiving is kind of counterintuitive, which is we need to practice self-compassion, self-acceptance. I know that Thanksgiving is a time we look out, but I think in 2020 we start by being self-accepting, being gentle with ourselves, because if we are not being gentle with ourselves, we will be harsh with the world. It's such a complete ratio. And so as we learn to accept these are hard days and some days we don't live them well, then we can look out in the world and think, for them too, these are hard days and some days they don't live them well. And some people are having a very tough time. As the months grind on, we are hearing, aren't we, about people who haven't been able to visit with loved ones. Whether they're in a nursing home or in another province, many different circumstances. And for them to be told, well, be glad that you don't have COVID, it belittles where they are. So we want to honor the fact that our suffering meters are all very individual. There's no universal point where you get to say, yes, that's truly painful, but I'm sorry, that's exaggerating. We want to be at that place of compassion. And especially on Thanksgiving, we're missing, aren't we? The yam crack, the big dinner, the running around at the last minute, making the gravy, mashing the potatoes, getting ready for people. I actually had 2 people at my house the other day and spent about an hour measuring all my 6 feet so that I make sure that we were all safe. It was worth it. It was absolutely worth it, but in a house my size, 4 is the maximum. Now, the Unitarians in the States have a wonderful practice. I don't know if they still do it, but they used to do it, which in their Thanksgiving is, later, but it doesn't matter. They would imagine inviting people to the table. Now, I was just thinking about that this year. We've been having, since COVID, a number of M&S videos. We've been hearing the story of people, a sheltering house in Africa, the First Nations and all their work to help people recover from the residential schools. What if we were able to imagine having those people at the table with us? And then we could go farther. We don't even have to imagine anybody we know or who would ever accept our invitation. We could imagine inviting Michelle Obama. We could invite anyone we wanted to this table for the specific reason to say thank you. Thank you to the people who receive the small grants possible now from the Mission and Service Fund across Canada and who keep shelters open, who supply nurture and counseling to women leaving abusive relationships. Thank you to the people who are now at First United Church in downtown Vancouver making hot soup for lunch. Thank you to the people working with the seniors at our place. We bring them in and sit them down at our table and say, here's what I made you. I've made you something very special because I have an important message. Your work is not unknown. You are not alone. Terry Waite was taken as a captive. You remember his story a couple of decades ago now. And while he was kept captive, his kidnappers, his imprisoners said to him, nobody knows you're here. Nobody cares about you if you live or die. And then one day for some reason, he got a postcard. And in the postcard, a total stranger wrote to him and said, we know you're there. That changed everything. Our imaginary thank you dinners say, we know you're there. To the others from First Metropolitan that we don't get to see anymore, we know you're there. To the people in the churches in Bella Coola, 100 Mile House, and to the people who've never been to church, we know you're there. And how about Penny Bond and all the people in the Our Place family who get the Our Angel gifts? All the ones working for the Cops for Cancer. Thank you. We know you're there. We saw what you did. We're reaching out to you. If we had a huge board in front of the church, people could put it on in a chalkboard and write down all their thank yous. We'd be surprised at how quickly that board would fill up, just as how many people we could invite if we were allowed to have them at dinner. So Thanksgiving 2020, be gentle with yourself. This is a very different season. And then in that place of self-compassion and outreach, think of the people who have made you happy. Are there ones you would invite in your spiritual imagination? Make tea for them. At the end of Thich Nhat Hanh's book, Buddha and Jesus Brothers, he has an image. He has the Buddha pouring tea for Christ, saying, what can I do for you today? Jesus pours tea for the Buddha, says, no, what can I do for you? May Thanksgiving be a time where we choose to pour tea for the others and to say to them, what can I do to express my thanksgiving? Those 7 things that are up on this display that we can plant, from the onion to the carrots that would grow again, perhaps that's an important resource for us today. Planting things. This time of year, my mom always planted paper whites. Do you remember them? They took about 8 weeks, I think, to go from a little weird bulb to a beautiful little tiny white flower. She also grew amaryllis and hyacinths, other things in the house. Maybe this year, that's something we could pick up. And like Job say, look at that. We are looking at the wisdom of God. Amen.